Public-private partnerships. How can PPPs deliver better services? Managing stakeholder engagement.
Hello, my name is Brian Samuel. I'm the Public-Private Partnerships Coordinator at Caribbean Development Bank here in Barbados. I'm here at the plant of the Ionics Freshwater Limited, a public-private partnerships that is in operation in Barbados. Today we're talking about stakeholder consultation in public-private partnerships. Why do we do it and how do we do it and what should we do and what should we not do? First of all, let's look at why should we engage in stakeholders and who are the stakeholders? Well, first of all, we need to engage with stakeholders when we are doing public-private partnership transactions because simply it's good governance. All PPPs are political and most of them are controversial. So therefore it makes sense to engage with the people who are going to be affected by it one way or the other. Extensive consultation will lead to better public-private partnerships, taking into account the views of all the different stakeholders, both positive and negative. If stakeholders are briefed on and their views are taken into account, this will lead to a better acceptance of the public-private partnership, both in terms of the public at large and also the stakeholders who are directly affected. Designers of the PPP will have to then horse trade between the different objectives of the different partners and the different stakeholders, because not everybody wants the same thing out of a PPP. Most importantly, if you don't engage with stakeholders, they have the capacity to derail the entire transaction if they are not happy. For example, in St. Lucia, in 2008, they were privatizing the WASCO, the public water utility. But then it became a political hot potato, and it was too hot to handle in an election year, and the whole transaction was cancelled. Who are the stakeholders, and what do they want? Well, there are many stakeholders, and they all want different things. Consumers want better service and lower tariffs. Politicians want big projects, big proceeds, and ribbon cutting. Investors want certainty, transparency, fairness, and a good rate of return. Financiers want a bankable deal. NGOs want lots of things depending on their focus, if it's gender, if it's environmental, and so forth. Workers and unions want better pay, better conditions, and more jobs. Alternative providers, they want opportunities, and they don't want to be crowded out by the PPP. And finally, the media. They want to get the story and they want to be informed. For example, when we were privatizing Uganda Telecoms in 2000, we had extensive consultation with political, with the NGOs, with consumers, with the media, and so forth. And in the end, the transaction was hailed by the East African newspaper as, quote, the fairest, most transparent privatization transaction anywhere on the African continent. And I personally took that as a real compliment. Designing a strategy for stakeholder consultation is a specialized field, so hire the specialists. Don't try and do this yourself when there are people out there whose job it is to spread the message and spread it well. There are several ways to inform stakeholders. First of all, you collect information. You do opinion surveys. You survey the investors. You survey the consumers. You do willingness to pay surveys, etc. Secondly, you provide information. You let people know exactly what it is that you're planning and what you're planning to do and how it will affect them. Thirdly, you consult with them. You identify problems, you offer options, and you propose solutions. Then there's joint decision making. You actually go to the stakeholders and say, well, let's see if we can jointly come up with some ideas to improve the situation. Of course, this may be limited. You can't give everybody the rights to decide. And finally, joint action. You can form partnerships. You can form partnerships with community groups. You can form partnerships with different stakeholders to make the PPP more effective. Not all forms of stakeholder consultation will be relevant at the same time. It simply depends on the specifics of the transaction in question. For example, Haiti employed a public-private partnerships education specialist to spread the word starting in schools and communities. And they produced an extensive range of public-private partnership information documentation in English, French, and in Creole. There are different ways of interacting with stakeholders. For one, there's printed materials, brochures, flyers, and information leaflets. Then there's opinion polls and surveys. It's very important to get the views of the people who will be affected by the PPP. Then there are focus groups, face-to-face discussion groups with the concerned stakeholders to get their views. And there's online forums, town hall forums, social media, and so forth. Now be careful, because you don't always have control over social media, so this has to be handled with some amount of care. And then, where you really have to be careful, is media interviews, because we know the media. Media love to sell newspapers, and they love to sell stories, and they are masters at putting a spin on things that you say, so be careful what you say. For example, just last year, I did a, quote, harmless interview with a newspaper in Trinidad at a PPP conference, where we talked about, among other things, governments needing to make use of professional advisors. Then I was horrified the next day when I saw the headline in the newspaper that says, "Samuel says politicians butt out of PPP processes." That's not what I said, but that's what sold the newspapers. Stakeholder consultation can and should result in a better PPP. Governments, advisors, financiers, and investors don't know it all, contrary to their own inflated opinions of themselves. We all need to find out what people want and put that into the mix. Stakeholder consultation is designed to improve the actual structure of the PPP itself by getting the views of all the various parties and also getting them to accept the fact that this is a PPP that has some benefits. Willingness to pay surveys will inform operators as to what people are willing to pay for their services and will improve their revenue stream. Investor surveys are also very important. If you're going out for a transaction, it's very important to get the views of the investors. Otherwise, you might go out there and you get no bidders. You have to go out, test the market beforehand, and get the views of the investors, the people who would actually be putting their money into the venture. Also, you need to get the views of financiers. Very important. Financiers are the people who are going to make it happen. So get their views as to what constitutes a bankable deal. For example, in the city of Cartagena in Colombia, national regulations called for monthly billing of water. Now, the private operator that was running the Cartagena water supply said this was very difficult for lowly paid workers, especially those who were paid daily or weekly. It was very difficult for them to pay monthly. So, through discussions and communications with community groups, a solution was developed where community organizations would collect the billings for the water utility on a weekly or bi-weekly basis and then pass this on to the utility. This improved the collection rates and it made it easier for the consumers to pay their bills. Rather than having a monthly bill to pay, they could pay it weekly or bi-weekly. It's a fact of life that you can't please everybody. There's always going to be somebody disgruntled or somebody not happy. The challenge is to please more stakeholders than you displease, especially the important ones. Not all groups will benefit to the same extent that they had hoped. So therefore, it's very important to get that matrix right, where you minimize the discomfort and maximize the advantages to the different stakeholders. Support will be more likely to be forthcoming if the stakeholders feel that the design of the process has been fair and transparent and that their views have been taken into account. If they understand the objectives of the reform, they are more likely to accept the PPP, even if they didn't get exactly what they wanted from the transaction. More than anything else, stakeholders want to feel that their views have been taken into account and that their views matter. And that really is, the end of the day, what we want to achieve by stakeholder consultation. Thank you.
This has been an Open Learning Campus presentation brought to you by the World Bank Group, accelerating solutions through learning.